Thank you for joining our Wednesday evening Bible study. Please stay tuned for some important announcements immediately following the service.
We are continuing our study in the book of Philippians, and I get so excited about getting to come and to share as we walk through this book of Philippians, this pastoral love letter, this almost a blueprint on how to have effective relationships. Can I share something with you as you're turning to Philippians, the 4th chapter, verses 4 through 7? Can I share something with you about ministry? Ministry is about relationships. If you are in business, let me give you some advice. You won't be good in business if you are in sports. Whatever you do, it is about building relationships. I think I'm a good preacher. I work hard at developing a craft, but I want to be better at relationships than I am at sermons. Because there are people who think you can be in ministry and only have to connect to God. There are people who think that in ministry you can treat people any kind of way and still be spiritual, even in your faith. Oh, I'm so spiritual. But it is about relationships. If God didn't expect for you to have relationships with people, the moment you got saved, he would have taken you to heaven. And this is a word for people who say, I don't care what they think. You need to start caring. Don't say that around anybody else. I don't care what folk think, because God left you here to win people. Teach us, Pastor. I'm doing the best I can. Starting in verse 4, hear these words. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say, rejoice. Let your gentleness be known to all men. The Lord is at hand. Be anxious for nothing, but in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasseth all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus. The grass withers, the flowers thereof fadeth away, but the word of our God shall stand forever. You may be seated in the presence of the Lord. This letter, particularly this 4th chapter, Paul is concluding this letter. Remember, he is in prison. He is writing to people, and oftentimes when we read Scripture, we tend to think that the people when we read it from, it's called hermeneutic, from our particular point of view. We read it from our point of view. And we think that the people to whom he is writing are going through the same things that we are. But the truth of the matter is that most of the first century church would be embarrassed about the stuff that we complain about. I mean, because we complain about not having the houses that we want or the cars that we want. And for them, it was a struggle to eat, to live, to not be eaten, to not be beaten, to not be thrown in jail because they had faith. Can you imagine when we get to heaven and we're standing around the throne of God and we're talking to each other about how we had to struggle, and John the Baptist is going to come and say, when I was on Patmos, that hard, rocky island filled with snakes, I was isolated. I was left there to die separated. I had been banished. John the writer will say that then John the Baptist is going to say, well, you know, I got beheaded. I lost my head behind the dance. And Peter was going to say, well, you know, they crucified me upside down. That's why they have those crosses, the St. Peter's cross. And then I'll say, you know how long I had to keep an iPhone 10 when the 11 came out? I mean, they won't compare. So he writes this letter, and he says to these people who are going through, now remember, there is this note of joy no matter what is happening. He writes this letter of joy. He's writing to people who are facing all kinds of persecutions, but then he is writing to them from prison. And he really talks about really 4 conversations that this idea, this whole chapter really is about power. That series of power. Last week he talked about unifying power, but today he's talking about fortifying power. This power that fortifies our hearts. And I'll get to that, this power to fortify. And he says that if you're going to make it through with all the stuff that's going on in the world, he just kind of says that there's some conversations you're going to have to talk. I told you this is really about relationships. Well, what is the relationship you have to you? He begins by saying here in verse 4 that your relationship, when you have that conversation to you, when you talk to yourself, he says that you ought to have a praise-filled determination. It's in the text. Listen, now remember, this is a letter, and oftentimes when he writes this letter, this word rejoice means finally, the last word. It's almost a benediction. It says, as I'm leaving you, here's what I'm saying. Here's what he's saying in this text. The idea of joy and rejoicing is that joy is an inward expectation of a positive outcome. It is not based upon any outside circumstances. So what he's saying is there's something inside of me that says it's going to be all right no matter what's going on around me. How do I know this? I'm so glad you asked. You remember in chapter 3, he had just told us for our citizenship, our lifestyle is in heaven. We are already citizens of heaven. And then later on in verse 5, he's going to use a Greek term, maranatha, that the Lord is near. He says, because we are citizens of heaven and God and Jesus is coming to get us, or Jesus is close by us, it is ours to say to ourselves, be joyful. And this idea, I like it because it means keep refilling yourself with joy. He says that it is not a one-time thing. Okay, I'm joyful, it's over now, but I got to keep on refilling myself with joy, because the truth of the matter is life keeps on taking me down. That's why I got to keep saying to myself, my hands I'm going to raise, my mouth is going to be full with praise, my feet are going to dance, not because of what's going on around me, but because of what I got on the inside of me. It is this delightful conviction. It is not happiness, because happiness is related to happening. Rejoicing is related to resources. If I got happy happenings, if I got good happenings, I can be happy. If everything is going the way I want it, I can be happy. But rejoicing is related to resources. So even when I'm not happy, I can rejoice because I've got some resources. Nobody likes to go through the death of a loved one. We've yet to grasp, because we've not seen death from the other side. We don't like it. Nobody is happy, not with good sense, when somebody you're used to talking to every day leaves you. You still want to talk to them, and you're not happy about it. But if they were a believer, you can rejoice, because you got the resource that says, precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of his saints. You can rejoice because earth has no sorrow that heaven cannot heal. You can rejoice because you know death doesn't have the last word. You can rejoice because you know that one day, even if they don't come back to be with you, you're going to be with them. And when you get together, you'll see Jesus. It is not a giddy rose fear. It's not a giddy looking at life through rose-colored glasses. It's based upon what I've been through in the past. I know I've got a conviction that everything is going to be all right. I just got a feeling what joy does, and the reason I keep on refilling is because life has a way of pushing in. Do you know the way that they keep planes in the air, that there is pressure, and the higher you get, the more pressure there is on the plane. So the plane has a pressure on the inside that pushes on the outside, so that there's a balance between what's pushing on my outside and what's pushing from preach Delvin Atchison I am. So that God has given, and the higher I get, the more the pressure becomes. So God gives me more on the inside to push out so that I'm not crushed. P.T. Fawcett, who was a theologian, said it like this: until that which is above us gets in us, we will succumb to what's around us. That when what's above you gets in you, it'll keep you from falling apart with what's around you. Now that's what Forsyth said. Big Mama said it like this: I've got something within that holdeth the reins, something within me that banishes all pain, something within me I cannot explain, all that I know. While I'm here, I think I ought to stick a pen and say this joy that I have, the world didn't give it to me, and the world can't take. I have determined to have joy. But that's not all, he says. So that's my conversation with me. I say to myself, refill, Delvin, refill yourself with joy. But then he says, not only is there a conversation with me, but what is my conversation with other people? It's right here in verse 5. Listen to what he says. Let your gentleness. I like this verse, y'all, because some will say your compassion. So I not only ought to have a praise-filled determination, I ought to have a pleasant disposition. Listen to the way this reads in the Greek, and you can start shouting. It won't even scare me. It says, "Let your sweet reasonableness, your forbearance, your being satisfied with less than you are due, become known to all men, because the Lord is near." There are some believers who love to brag about how they can get back. And this writer would say, now you can spend your life getting back, or you can go ahead and get ahead. The word here, this word, it is pleasant, it is compassion, your kindness, your gentleness, literally says that just because you are due, you may be right in being able to get back at somebody, but God does not call us always to get what we deserve. Because we live in a culture that says, now listen, if you let folk run over you, they're going to run over you. Baby, what you got to do is you got to check them. You got to let them know. And we have folk who love, I am not the one. Baby, come on, talk to me if you know anybody. I'm not talking about you, I'm talking about somebody on your road. But don't look, because they might be looking at you. One thing about them, I want them to know I'm a Christian, but I'm not weak. And when they told me, listen, do you know for me, the true sign of Christian maturity is when a Christian has been wrong and can still maintain a level of dignity. See, how do you respond? Because just because you can get back and you do it, or you put them in check because you can, the non-believer would do that. He says we ought to go out of our way so that people will see the pleasant disposition, the difference that the Lord has made in your life. I was listening to Robert Morris from Gateway. I was passing on 10 minutes and I heard him say, and he said about how somebody had wronged him, another friend had wronged him, and the Lord was convicting him to be forgiving. And he said, but Lord, he doesn't deserve it. And he said, if he deserved it, it wouldn't be forgiveness. You don't forgive debts that people pay you back. They get receipts for that. Here it is. That believers ought to be known not by how many people we can put down, but by how many people we can lift up. Christianity at its strength is not weakness. I'm not saying we'll run over, but I'm saying we don't fall into every fight. That there's something about us that says this person is different. There ought to be something about us that when people look at us, they know we are different. You know, you got a choice if you're going to be a believer. He says the conversation you have with yourself is that you can either be a thermostat or a thermometer. A thermometer reflects the temperature. A thermostat regulates the temperature. And there are some believers who, in every time a situation is hot, they get hot. I got right in there with them. I mixed it up right in there with them. They found out they saw the other side of me. But you've got to learn that Christian growth is not reflecting the temperature in the room, but it's regulating the temperature in the room. I'm learning, and I told him I was going to tell this on it. Chester Anderson, who's our church administrator, I have watched people say stuff to Chester, and I wanted to say some stuff back to him, and I started looking for bad words, so I text Patrick or Jude, because I know they would have some. I mean, they would look them up. They would Google them. They don't have them. They would Google them. They don't have them. But I seen Chester just, okay. Part of Christian growth is saying, okay, you're mad, but I'm not going to let you make me mad. I'm going to bring it down so that when we leave here, because you know what I've discovered about most arguments? You take this for what it's worth. That after the first 5 to 10 minutes, it stops being over the principle. Somebody will say, I believe this way. You'll say, I believe this way. That goes on by 5 minutes, and then after that, it starts to be personal. And no believer who's trying to get people into the kingdom, who's trying to build a congregation, trying to build a community of faith, ought to let other people decide what the temperature is going to be. We ought to have such an attitude, we ought to have such a reflection of God in our disposition. And we're like that lady who was standing on the corner. That lady was on the corner. I've heard this story, and she was on a cold day in Chicago. She sees a young man who doesn't have a coat. She takes him into the dry goods store and buys him a coat. She said, young man, have you eaten? He said, no. She feeds him. And when she gets ready to leave, he said, wait a minute, ma'am, are you God's wife? She said, no. I'm his daughter. He said, I knew y'all were kin. There ought to be something about you, your spirit, that makes folk wonder if you and God are kin. And there ought to be something about you that will let people know, if you've been around my daddy, you know that I have my father's characteristics. I look like him physically, but they had a saying in the country that even if it's not yours biologically, that if you feed them long enough, they start to look like, they start to look like you. Let me tell you, I am his, but he fed me. And that's what I want to tell you, that the more you eat from your father, the more like him you look. There ought to be somebody who says that you look like your daddy. But watch what the text says. Here is this praise-filled determination. Here in this text is a pleasant disposition, but then there's prayerful devotion. I'm just welcome. Watch the text now. It's about relationships, so he has a conversation with himself. I'm going to rejoice. He has a conversation with the world. That's where he shows his pleasant disposition. But then he starts to talk to God. Here's this prayerful devotion. Watch what happens in this text. It says several things here. It says, stop perpetually worrying about anything. It's in the text. In the Greek it reads, but in everything by prayer and whose essence is worship and devotion. Make your supplications or your announcements about you made unto God with specific requests. But either way, give thanks. Can I walk through that like I feel that? Here is what he says. He says, now, when you talk to God, you first start off with an attitude of worship and devotion. That when you talk to God, you need to talk to God knowing that he's not just a regular every day. Joe, he is God. And I am so grateful that he's talking to me, that I worship him. I ought to have an attitude of worship. And there ought to be some stuff that's not hard for me to do. I mean, the stuff we love to do, we can do it at a moment's notice. I mean, if you're talking to me in the hall and somebody saying, well, you know, it's a sunny day, Delvin, would you like to play golf? You don't have to say, I'll bribe you. If you say, now, Delvin, there's a soul food restaurant and I'm hungry, you don't have to twist my arm. I say, I got my car outside. What time can I meet you there? Come on. Some of you, if I say, you know, there's a new mall open and they got Jimmy Choo shoes and they 85% off, you will say, Pastor, I was there yesterday. Come on, talk to me. That's really what he's saying. He says he gives this, it is an imperative. It is an order. It is the first negative one in this flow. He says, be joyful, be pleasant, stop being anxious, stop worrying. What is the antidote to worry? Worship. He says that when you have an attitude of worship, that the more you worship, the less you will worry. He says that the believer ought to have the attitude that when somebody says, let's worship, you say, I was there yesterday, but I'm ready to go again. One of the reasons I love Dr. Patrick Bradley is whatever else is going on, we know when we come to church, we are going to worship. He says it ought to be your attitude that you constantly walk around with worship, and a part of worship is prayer. Watch what he says here. Hallelujah. He says when you worship God, you get a sense of who God is. And he uses this term supplication. This word supplication means you can ask for yourself. It is to pray for you. That when you worship God and you know who God is, once you tell God what you think about him, then you can ask him for what you want. Once you tell God who he really is in your life, then you can ask him. But watch what he says. He says, don't just ask God for a request. When he's supplication, he uses the term request. It means to be specific. Some of us are not specific with God because we don't have the faith to say, God, I want this. As a matter of fact, we treat God like he can't do it, like he's not able. God, I want this, but I'm scared to ask you for it. So I'm going to just say anyway, no, I've got some specific blessings. I've got some stuff I want to talk to you about. And because I talk to you about who you are, I can ask you for what I need. I'm going to shout this morning. I ain't playing. Now watch what he says. He says, whether I'm supplicating, asking God for a request, whether I'm worshiping, or whether I have a specific request, he says, with all of this, it is with thanksgiving. Here is the password. You've been looking for the code. You've been looking for the key. The Bible says that the password to getting to God is thanksgiving. You know how when you're trying to sign on, you know when you're trying to get access to your account, you got to have the password. That's what the psalmist says. Enter into his gates with thanks. When they ask you at the gate, what's the word? Thanksgiving. I'm thankful when I ask him. I'm thankful for what is. I'm thankful. And I tell you, here is Christian growth. Real Christian growth says, I'm not just thankful to God compared to what's going on in somebody else's life. I love the song, tragedies are commonplace, all kinds of diseases, but I'm thankful even if nobody else gets a disease. I'm thankful even if nobody else is homeless. I'm thankful for what he's done for me. If nobody else was in the world but me and God, I'd be thankful. I'm thankful because I know I don't deserve it. I'm thankful because I keep messing up, but it gives me another chance. I'm thankful because I should have been dead. I left home with shout. When I come to church, I come with shouting on my mind. I don't plan to wear the same shirt next week because I plan to sweat this one out. I left home with saying, thank you. I wish I had about 8 people in here who say I left home with shouting on my mind. Because I knew when I got to the church, I didn't deserve to come in. I've messed up so many times that God shouldn't give me another chance. But the fact he accepts my praise, I'm thankful for just another day. I'm thankful because some of the stuff I got myself in, he got me out of. I'm thankful because some of the stuff about me you should know, you don't know, because the Lord has kept it here. I'm thankful. I'm thankful that some of the stuff about you I don't know, because God has kept you covered. I'm thankful. I'm thankful that even when it was hard, it wasn't as hard as it could be. I'm thankful. I'm thankful that when I buried my daddy, I didn't have to bury my mama too. I'm thankful. I'm thankful that when I buried my son, I still had children left. I'm thankful. I'm thankful that even if I lost this house, God got another house. I'm thankful. I'm thankful I'm clothed in the right mind. I'm thankful this morning. Excuse me, I'm with the noisy crew. And I get happy in a minute, because when I think about the goodness of God. Hey. D. King tells the story, and he's going back to Lane College. And he was talking about there was this undignified lady at the graduation. And he was there in Jackson, Tennessee, and he's going back to speak at Lane College. And he said after he got through, there was this one woman, when they called her name, she was just hollering. And he said she ran up to the stage and said, "Nobody but Jesus." She just kept hollering, "Nobody but Jesus." He said, finally he asked the president, said, what's up with that? What's her story? He said, "That's her granddaughter." He said, "And her parents died. She had to send her to school. She didn't have enough money." She said, "But every semester we somehow found a way to get her tuition paid. She just graduated debt-free." And D. King said, "Y'all stopping her?" He said, "If you'd have told me, I'd have joined her." Because some stuff you can just say, "Oh, good." Some stuff y'all know we don't shout in church like we used to. If I get y'all to stand up and clap, I'm doing something. I mean, if y'all stand up and clap, we're here. But there ought to be some time when I can't give the bank a credit. Ought to be some time it ain't got nothing to do with the doctor. The doctor had already walked out and said it couldn't be done. There ought to be some time when you just can say, "Nobody but Jesus." I'm out of here, but I got to say, I was going to quit, but verse 7 says, D, say a word about me. I got to say it. Here is verse 7 is the real shout. Because here's what happens in verse 7. I told you he has a conversation with himself. Rejoice. He has a conversation with people around him. That's that pleasant disposition. He has a conversation to God. That's a prayer for devotion. But then God takes over the conversation and gives him a powerful defense. He said, the peace of God, this inner contentment, watch this word. He says, it's the idea, it's a military term, it's a sentry, it's a defense. He says literally that God's peace will take hostage of your heart. That God builds a fort around your heart with his peace. And he says it is an indescribable peace. I can't explain it. I love words. I'm always trying to learn, but I can't. This idea, he says it surpasses understanding. I don't know why God does what he does. I know I'm not the only one in the don't know why group. Am I the only one here who can testify that when folk are asking you why you're blessed and you want to tell them, ain't no need of you hating. I don't know why I'm blessed. I'm just as shocked as you are. Can I get just two shocked saints in here to testify? That you know the blessings you have, you don't deserve it. He says, but that peace has guarded my heart. And when God guards your heart, he watches what goes in it. And when he watches what goes in it, he can control what comes out of it. So I'm not going to be tripping about stuff. The world can fall apart if it want to, but I've got a peace that's going to keep me singing. Like a bird in a limb on a storm. On a bird in a storm on a limb, I can say, I got a feeling that everything is going to be all right. I got a peace that's beyond comprehension. I just got a feeling that God's going to work it out for my good. I'm not going to be tripping. I'm not going to fall apart. That's why I'm not going to be anxious. I'm out of here. My wife was telling me that yesterday at the CEO meeting, the Christian Entrepreneurs meeting, that I think she said Dale was testifying about a man who came and who had told him that he had been in a storm. He said that the alarm had gone off and they had a room that they went to, and his wife just kept fussing at him to get in the room, and so he wouldn't make his wife mad. He went into the room, and when they went into the room, they closed everything, and while they were in the room, the storm passed, and he's thinking to himself, I don't know why she tripping, ain't nothing happening, I'm in here so she won't be saying anything. But when he came outside, the only thing that was left was the room that they were in. The storm had passed over and destroyed all around, but the room had kept it covered. I'm out of here when I shout on this, that life can put you in a storm, but I got some good news, that God is able to keep you covered in the midst of a storm. I've seen the lightning flash. I've heard the thunder roll. I felt sin breakers dashing, trying to conquer my soul. But I heard the voice of Jesus telling me still to fight on. He promised never to leave me, never to leave me alone. Is there anybody here who can say he's shelter in the time of storm? Is there anybody here that just want to thank him for watching over you? Thank him for how he kept you. Thank him because he never left you. Ain't he all right? Ain't he all right? Ain't he all right? I tell you, if this wasn't a teaching sermon, I think I'd shout right through here, because my soul gets happy thinking about the goodness of Jesus. My soul gets happy thinking about where the Lord has brought me from. And every now and then, I just want to shout about his goodness. I had somebody tell me that when the preacher starts to hoop, that's when I turn him off. But I stopped by to tell somebody, turn me off, because this hoop ain't for you. When I think about the goodness of the Lord, I start to celebrate for me. Is there anybody here that know the man is all right? Ain't he all right? I said, ain't he all right? Ain't he? Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Glory, 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 glory. If you're here today, we're standing all over the building. I got a feeling that everything is gonna be all right.
Westside, here are our announcements for the week. Westside and the WHO Ministry are conducting a community health fair, which will include free health screenings and education, plus a Carter Blood Care blood drive. The WHO Ministry is requesting blood donors to sign up to donate because when you give, others can live. It's a generous humanitarian act, and we're about serving God, sharing Christ, and loving people. Be a part of this life-saving campaign. Scan the QR code on the flyers that are posted at all kiosks to schedule your donation time today. The health fair will be September 30th from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. HBCU Sunday with special musical guests, the Prairie View A&M University Marching Storm kicks off at 9:45 a.m. October 1st. Come celebrate HBCUs and represent your school, sorority, or fraternity with your school gear or colors. Beginning October 4th through October 25th, shop will be on Wednesdays from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. WBC welcomes the Lewisville Police Department on October 8th as part of the Faith and Blue initiative immediately after worship service in the Assembly Hall. They will share information on how to be safe in the community, school, and home. Light refreshments will also be served. Join us for fellowship and fun at Westside's annual Fall Fest celebration on October 29th at 9:45 a.m. Members are asked to donate candy, no nuts or peanut butter please, beginning October 9th. Donation bins will be located at various kiosks. For additional information regarding any of these announcements and much more, please visit us at WBCCHURCH.org. Weekly announcements are also available on the West